Wright Mills and the social conflict theory. Uh, so a lot of people are having internet issues. Okay, no problem. All right.
Maybe
So
because of the rain and all.
maybe because of the rain. Yeah, not a problem. So what have you understood from the from the last two lectures that we have had and we've discussed about the conflict theory? What are some of the inferences you have drawn out? What is the conflict theory largely talking about? Like we've dealt with Karl Marx, we've dealt with Max Weber. Okay, so what are some of the inferences that you have gathered around the conflict theory? Nothing? Anyone? Risha? I'm going to start calling names now.
Yeah, yeah.
Risha? She here?
Yes.
Yeah, so tell me, what did you gather about the conflict theory that we have done so far? We've dealt with Karl Marx, we've dealt with Max Weber. What did you essentially think about whatever we have done? What are the inferences you may have gathered? Like about society, what is society, according to the two thinkers that we have looked at? Okay, nothing from any of you. Yes, Risha, tell me.
Hello.
Hello, yes?
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah. So I think that this whatever I have learned about this conflict theory in these lectures is like um I don't know how to explain, but
Hmm. No, but whatever you have gathered, no? Like for instance, when you talk about Karl Marx, what really comes to mind?
that he was a capitalist and
Okay, all right. He was not a capitalist, okay, but he spoke about two classes of people. Okay.
बेचारा मर जाए.
Yeah, I mean, it's okay. All right. So he spoke about two classes of people. Uh, he referred to these classes as the capitalist or the bourgeoisie, and then the other class of people he referred to as the proletariat or the working classes. Okay. So largely, if you look at whatever we have dealt with so far, we talk about social stratification. Hmm? That the society largely has been stratified into different sections or into classes, as both Marx and Weber referred to. Okay, for Marx it was about two classes of people. For Weber it was about four classes of people, and these we had discussed in detail in the last class. Okay, uh, but essentially, what we have understood through all of this is that the stratification that exists in society is actually very harmful. Okay, that is what is the main fundamental that the conflict theory that wants to kind of bring about. Okay, it sees that this social stratification actually brings about dysfunctionality in society, and it also looks at social life as basically a competition that focuses largely on distribution of resources. Then it also looks at power structures, and then of course inequality that exists in society. uh, so Charles Wright Mills or C.W. Mills, he is known as the founder of the modern conflict theory. Now, one of the reasons is because he's from the 1900s. Like he was born in 1916, and then I think he passed away in the 1960s. Okay, so he is looked at as a fairly recent scholar in that sense, who spoke about the conflict theory much in not very differently from Karl Marx or Max Weber, but he looks at it. He looks at this whole power structure a little differently from the way they looked at it at. Okay, so for him, he believed that social structures are created because, again, of conflicts that exist between differing interests. Okay, and as usual, of course, the common man. Okay, the larger group of people, the larger group of masses. They are the ones who are impacted by this kind of social structure, and this largely results in, of course, again, a differentiation that exists in the power structures as well. Now, he classified the two groups as the elite and the others. Okay, so the elite makes for one class of people, and the others is makes for the other class of people. Okay, but for him, this elite group of people, they were like a few individuals who had, let's say, who had political, economic, and military kind of powers. Okay, and he felt that these are the group. This is a group of people who actually holds the power in their hands. Okay, so he largely kind of came about with this inference by looking at the society that existed in the United States. Okay, and according to him, that this kind of power elite structure, like, it exists in all modern societies, uh, but basically they're the privileged few. Okay. Now he felt that there are other institutions also that exist, okay, but they have kind of diminished in terms of its scope and power. Okay, so who are these elite now? Like I said, they belong to either the political class or the military class or the economic class. So the political would be maybe the ones who are holding powers of governance. Then you have the military class, of course. There is no explanation needed for that. And the economic could be the corporate realms. Okay, they could be seen as the corporates who actually hold this kind of a power. Now he felt that these three groups of, or these three categories of elite, they all come from very similar social backgrounds. Okay, and that is how they are kind of united. Now, if you look at the elite, for instance, okay, let's take the elite in India. Who would you classify as the elite? And I think we have discussed this in the previous classes as well. But if you have to go by C.W. Mill's definition of the elite, who would you classify as the elite? You can even drop names. Okay, it's a question. Who would you classify as the elite in our country? Hello. Okay, the Ambanis, all right. Okay, so they would make for the, let's say, the corporate section of society. Salman Khan, Soham. Okay. All right. Who else? The Sindhyas. Okay. Okay, yes, they are the political class. Who else? Anybody else? Any other names that you would like to drop? So basically, Bollywood superstars. Okay, all right. Yeah, even they are considered as a group of elite. Okay, and of course they don't. Maybe like they do not fit into this category of political or corporate or military, but yet they are considered as the elite. All right. So if you look at the elite, there is this, this one commonality that they all share, that they come from, very similar income and occupational pyramids. Okay. They are born of the same, they're born of the same upper class. Even Mills went on to say that, they go to the same preparatory schools, or they even, most of them are even, students of the Ivy League. Okay. I hope you know what the Ivy League stands for, or what is the Ivy League all about. You do know, right?
Yes.
Yes, you do. Okay. So most of these people, okay, they go to the same schools, they go to the same higher schools of learning or academic institutions, and largely they belong to very similar organizations, and they're very closely linked, okay, to each other. Even when it comes to, let's say, an institution like marriage, okay, you will find them, ensuring that they do not marry anybody else below that class of people. Okay, but they even choose life partners, or for their children, or for themselves, based on again the same pyramid, okay, that they hail from. uh, okay, so Shima has a question, and I hope somebody can answer. Does any one of you think you belong to the elite group? Okay, it's a very interesting question, and you may answer in the chat box itself. Okay. Going on further, Mills actually thought that the power elite is basically this alliance, okay, of the economic or the corporate, what we would call it as, the political and the military power. Okay. And who are the other levels of power in any society? Who are the other levels of power apart from the power elite? This he classified as the great mass of people. That is basically maybe even you and I, okay, can be in that category. Or maybe not, okay, because some of us may even belong to, another structure itself. So he felt that the great masses of people are largely unorganized. Okay, they may be powerless, they may be mostly controlled, okay, and even manipulated, for that matter, by the power elite. Okay, so he felt that this group of people largely were the voiceless. Okay, they were not able to kind of express their dissent in any particular way, uh, but they were largely controlled by the elite classes. Now, interestingly, he says that there is another class of people, which probably you and I can fit in, okay? Because he says that this class of people belongs to a section of society who are between the masses and the elite, okay? This is what he calls as a middle level of power, or maybe what we understand commonly being referred to as the middle classes, okay? Now, this consisted of probably the intellectuals, then, opinion leaders, or maybe special interest groups. But he felt that this group of people is largely apathetic. He felt that this group of people, they do not represent the other people, the other category of people, that is the masses in general. And nor do they have actually any real effect on even the elite. So, somewhere around the 1950s, okay, Mill seemed to be becoming more and more concerned with the rise of militarism, okay, especially amongst the elite group of people. So he felt that this group of people, they came about, okay, mainly because of, and because he saw this kind of a structure arising in the 1950s, he felt that this was probably the aftermath of the Second World War, okay, which had ended in 1945. And even though there were like huge implications of the war globally, okay, uh, Mills saw the rise of the military state, okay, serving the interests of the elite, especially of industrial societies. Okay. So for the political class, military power, he felt, was a good cover. Okay, like in the sense they could hide behind this military class whenever they did not perform well. Okay, whenever there was this lack of performance, or what he also called or referred to as lack of innovative leadership. Okay, he felt that the political class largely, used the military section of society as a cover. For the corporate or for the economic elite, he believed that they worked alongside with the military. Okay. And this was seen in the way public policy itself was influenced. Uh, we don't know that there is a thriving arms industry globally. Okay. And this arms industry basically, sells and or manufactures and sells weapons and military technology. Okay. So he saw that this kind of a confluence that existed, okay, between the military and the economic sections of the elite class were largely detrimental, okay, to a society. Now, if you look at even if you look at India, for instance, do you see this kind of a thing happening, where there is a kind of a nexus between the military and the corporate, or even the political? Hmm? What do you think? Is there a nexus between the corporate and the military? Or the military and the political, of course, has to be there, but the corporate and the military. You're quite aware of, the Rafale deal. I hope you are. We have been basking in the glory of. It's not really seen. Okay. Okay. So I want you to do one thing. Okay. Do read up on this whole Reliance and Rafale deal controversy. Okay. I think it's important that, yes, Anil Ambani, you're right. I think it's important that you read about this nexus that existed. Okay. Uh, okay, Ishan says at least not till that extent in India. Well, if you have to actually look at what is happening in present times, you will realize that it is fairly to some great extent, okay, that we see this kind of a nexus coming forth. Okay, but interestingly, we also notice hmm, that there is a lot of emphasis and importance given to the military. Huh? You may have heard references being made every now and then saying that that they are fighting for the country. They are, and which indeed, okay, they are, yes, but because they are doing such a great noble act, we shouldn't forget hmm, that we are indebted to this section. Okay, we are indebted to the military. Now, what is happening here? Okay, when this constant emphasis is being made on what the military is doing for us, okay, what the army is doing for us, or what the defense forces are doing for us as a nation, what is really happening? What is it? What does it stir inside most of us? Hmm? What is it? What do you feel when when people are constantly throwing these things at you, saying that yes, nationalism, absolutely, David. Okay, a spirit of nationalism, a spirit of like you feel patriotic. There was a very fine line between patriotism and nationalism. That we shouldn't speak against it. Absolutely, Prasad. Okay, that we shouldn't speak against the military. We shouldn't question the policies. Huh? We shouldn't talk about any kind of, so for instance, when we are investing in weapons, okay, when we are investing in the military in such a big way, we should not talk about it or against it, especially. Okay, we should always look at it as, acts of heroism, and that they are doing such a great sacrifice for the country. All right. So it's important to understand that behind the scenes, okay, that there is this nexus, okay, and that it is benefiting a certain group of people, okay. Uh, as Mills very rightly pointed out, for the political class, it is actually, it helps them seek refuge, okay, for their failures, and for the economic class or the corporate elite, it is basically uh, it is adding more funds into their, or more profits into their industry. Okay, so of course, like even that, and that is why it's important to even look at even in the Indian context. Okay, what is really happening behind the scenes? Every war that is fought is a very expensive affair, and it is the common people who bear the brunt of it. Hmm? It is not the elite, or it's not the political classes, but it is mostly the common man, okay, the others who bear the brunt of it. Okay, because and this is seen, through the taxation that comes about immediately after a war. Okay, the kind of taxation policies that are revised in order to kind of ensure that the economic does not undergo a major slump. Okay, so keeping all this in mind, uh, what can be done? What can be done in this kind of a power structure? Because for Mills, he sees that that there is a certain fault that lies also in the masses of people. Okay, because he says that that there is an apathy that is growing amongst the masses of people, uh, which kind of disallows them to even question. Hmm? They kind of take everything as face value, and by its face value, and then say that, okay, since this is what we expected to do, we might as well do it and not question it. And this is actually kind of seen as a problem, okay? Because this helps this elite group of people to thrive. Okay, and when we refuse to question the policies, when we refuse to kind of offer alternatives, this only enables a certain group of people to continue to dominate over us. Okay, Shima will take on from here. She will explain the dependency theory. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think Sarah has, explained everything about power, elite power, and from where to. So we'll go a little back, and I'll just share an image, and I want all of you to like pay attention to that image and say what kind of conflict do you see emerging. Uh, Wait a second. Can Sarah, can you see the image? No.
No, we actually, now we can. We can.
No, you can, no?
Yes, yes. But it's
Is it
going back to
visible?
the teams. It's going back to the teams.
Okay. Okay. Can everyone have a close look and identify different sources of power from where people can draw, and even if those powers are legitimate or not, or zones of conflict because of different powers? Hello. Let me see if I can copy it here rather than sharing. 1 second. Yeah, maybe that's a bit. Saya, can you hear? No.
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I
I
think
can
what
hear you.
I'll do is
Ah,
copy the image
okay.
in the comment box. Okay.
All right, all right.
Is it visible now? Yeah. Now, can
Yes.
everyone just take a few minute or a minute or two and identify the sources of conflict, and if those sources of conflict emerge through legitimate sources of power or illegitimate sources of power? Quick ones, like you don't have to take anything, like where you can quickly identify, yes, that this is a source of conflict. And not all conflict is, say, in the framework of politics or in the public domain. A lot of it also emerges in our social structure, you know. No one? Do you see a source of conflict, say, between where it says gender of family or religion of family or culture of family? Yeah, gender, correct. Any else? Anywhere else? So, okay, Mohit says he can't understand. Okay, let's take it this way. Yeah, religion, education, correct. Secularization, race, correct. Yeah. So, what the conflict theory also did was it critiqued this very flattened vision of the structural functionalism school of thought, okay, which imagined that, you know, human beings are inherently contradictory, they have problems, and they have issues because everyone thinks for their own self, okay, but we have social organizations and we have institutions and we have culture which can keep all of this conflict in place. It can keep a check and we don't really need to worry about it, okay. But do you see ruptures between, say, um, uh, like, you know, culture being the source of drawing power to keep the conflicts in check? Or let me just type it for everyone. So do you see that culture is a source of power from which groups draw to, you know, create conflict? Does that make sense, Sarah, or I'm like,
No, it does. It does.
okay? Can you think of something? Yeah, that's what it is trying to address, that it is very compartmentalized, like all are few things affecting other things. Exactly. That is what this whole conflict theory then critique the structuralism school, you know, the understanding of structure and functionalism school of thought, okay. But can anyone answer my question that culture is a source of power from where some groups find legitimacy to oppress some other group, okay. So, for example, the Khap Panchayat, okay. Now, Khap Panchayat is a cultural group, okay, which draws its power to regulate the female body, okay, or to regulate the interaction, that whom can women marry, whom, where can they go, if they can have an education, have long hair, short hair, wear, eat chow mein, not eat chow mein, and feel sexualized. Everything is regulated, okay. So we imagine the structuralism or functionalism school of thought imagines that, you know, these institutions takes care, it keeps in check our conflicts, but that is not necessarily the case. It is not keeping in check the conflict, but it is suppressing those voices of conflicts. Okay, does it make sense? Like, can you just say yes, no? Does it ring a bell? Can you think of any other parallel examples? Okay. The other very good example, okay, is when I said that to have a legitimate source of power or an illegitimate, where do you even, because even power distribution is unequal. So the conflict theory also critiques Marx's understanding that there's a, like, you know, Sarah said that C.W. Wright Mills and other engaged with this whole conception of the proletariat and the bourgeois, and they imagine this is the only straightforward conflict, and it can be taken care of, say, by unions and other things. But in India we have various variants of it, or as that image says, there are deviances. Okay, hello.
We can hear you.
Yeah, okay. So the other example is the recent killing of Vikas Dubai. Now, what in what framework of power do you imagine Vikas Dubai to be? I hope you remember who Vikas Dubai is. Anyone who was Vikas Dubai? Hmm? No one remembers who was he? Vikas Dubai was killed. He was Vikas Dubai only, no? Sarah was killed in UP 2 weeks
Yes,
back.
yes, yes.
Yeah,
He was
okay.
a gangster turned politician, if I'm not mistaken.
So he was not a politician. He was basically a middleman kind of a thing, or a power broker. Okay, but he
Yeah.
drew, yeah. So he drew his source of power, which was not necessarily in the legitimate sense. Okay, and and when they realized that he has come to a point where his power is also becoming monstrous, they killed him. Okay, and he started with his whole, say, his whole journey of being a power broker through the conflict which arose through his caste identity. Okay, and later he thought that he had transgressed his caste identity and had become a politician, but at the end of the day he was also identified through his caste identity, and the moment they found him indispensable, they killed him. Okay, yeah, a sort of de facto leader. Okay, so what I'm or for example, there's another example. I'm giving you these variants of example just to give you a sense that from where all do we draw our sources of power. Okay, say for example, yesterday these two young girls, Tanmay and what was the other name, Sarah? I don't remember. Okay, who were uh, uh, social workers who were assisting a rape victim in Bihar, and these social workers were put to jail. Okay, for just assisting a rape victim, and the lower court thought that they are defying them because they refused to sign on a piece of paper which had issues. So where are they drawing their power from? Okay, the judge, he is drawing from a legitimate source. Okay, but his legitimate source goes transgresses beyond his own jurisdiction, and he also draws power from the way the current state itself is functioning, you know, from where the current itself is distributing the power to suppress certain kind of voices. Okay, so at present you see now poets and writers and academicians who are generally and broadly categorized as urban Naxals, and they are being put into jail. Okay, so this is also one whole dimension of uh, power groups, like, you know, Sarah was speaking that power groups as elite groups, or bureaucrats or military or businessmen who are in a formal setup. They have gone to certain same kind of schools, they go to same kind of clubs, and they have same kind of familial association. One business house marries to another business house, and they maintain that whole ecosystem, okay, which we see in this the image I shared, which is a flattened view of the structural functional form of the society, okay. But the society doesn't uh, work in that very stagnant way, okay. The power elite is also shifting historically, okay. So earlier you had the czars, and you had the feudal system, or what we engage in and read in War and Peace. But now it has changed, okay. You have a lot of, especially in case of India, you have a lot of middlemen, you have power brokers, you have even in companies we now have middlemen and brokers who draw power at different, and they try to suppress, okay. But these are very, say, in the political economy framework, where we see a lot of conflict. But there's a lot of conflict we see, like, say, for this example, this image, it also shows you a conflict with, say, economy, environment and health, or even knowledge and education, for example, what is being taught in your school, okay. We say a very common argument which is given around today is that this is a left wing historical understanding, or this is a Congress history. What do you think is a Congress or a left wing history, and what is a right wing history? Any thoughts about it? Hmm? Any random thoughts on top of your head? What do you think is it? Okay. Anyone else? What is left history? What is Congress history? What is right wing history? How has history become so many histories? Who is writing the history? Filtered history, yes. As if you read E.H. Carr's book, What is History? It talks about the politics of writing history, right wing Hindutva agenda of RSS. For example, a very good example is all your TV serials which you see on Z and Z channel or Colors or other TV channels, which has this flattened history about Aurangzeb or Rana Pratap or Maharani Lakshmi Bai, or even film like अभी वो कौन सी फिल्म थी, Padmavat, yeah, and there was another movie, Tanaji, okay. So these are history where every power group which comes, okay. So any school of thought or any political group which, when it comes to power, does not just take care of power through, say, military or through political practices, but it also spreads its power through writing history, okay, through rewriting history. Like we saw that the imagination of what Ayodhya was, or whether it was a mosque, so to the extent that even Supreme Court didn't said, yeah, a mosque was broken, but you know it goes on to say what we saw yesterday is a practice of power, and the whenever and whoever the lead group comes, it writes its own history, okay. So it's the same thing, if you see, that's why I shared this. And then there's religion, there's medicine, if you look there, yeah, very true. Right wing authority hierarchy, and that authority and hierarchy of right wing even permeates into the domain of environment. Like you see, this government has said we don't need EIA and SI anymore. We can just go ahead and start any project, even if it is an environmental sensitive area. Okay, so basically, power produces conflict. Okay, and that power producing conflict can happen even between a husband and a wife, a child and his sibling, a child and his parents, you and your brother, sister. Human beings ultimately at the end of the day, they try and take care of their own benefits, their own profit, privilege, authority, whatever it is. Okay, so this whole conflict theory actually was a critique of the understanding of social stratification or social differentiation, or our imagination of a structural functionalist society, okay, where we imagine that there's only one commanding class and one obeying class, and as Marx said that okay, there's a proletariat and a bourgeois, or Weber said that there is a judiciary and there is an administration and there's a political class, and that is what it all takes care, and that is how it revolves. And Societe Wright Mill went ahead and spoke about power elite. Okay, but then we land up in geographies of like India, you know, where it has multiple and multiple layers. Okay, so say a Muslim female in a belonging to Jat community in Haryana exists. She exists in a ecology where the power is much different for say somebody who is from some other social political space, you know. So she is indulging through the she is negotiating her way through the khap panchayat. She's negotiating her identity as a Muslim, as a Mewat Muslim from Haryana. She's negotiating her identity as a female itself, okay, through her gender identities. Okay, so her negotiation takes multiple, and that's why, you know, of course, when we'll do yeah, sorry, of course, when we'll do gender study, feminist understanding of conflict, we'll see that, you know, how the female body itself is a source of uh, oppression and suppression, because, you know, that is a source where men or anyone who has the capacity to overpower you tries to overpower you through your own body. Okay, so it has multiple layers, and through which we'll look. So we'll also engage with the question of environment, we'll engage to the question of feminist understanding of conflict theory, and of course we have spoken about caste, class, and yeah. Any questions? Any more? Sarah, you want to add something?
No, no, nothing, nothing. What do you, I mean, do you have any questions, class?
Any other thing which you think we have missed in this combination of understanding around it? Order, authority, nationalism, freedom. Yes, we can draw it from any narrative. We have become so manipulative that it is no end to it. Nothing. Okay, so who's presenting next week? Who's presenting next week?
I think from 41 to 50.
31 to 40.
31 to 40. Okay.
Okay, and the
Fragmented.
fragmented citizenship in Gurgaon. Okay, great. So the other two group have submitted their writing, no?
Yes, they have. The other two groups did submit. I'm just thinking that since it's such a long class, do we do two groups next week or just we'll take up only one?
Oh yeah. Yeah, we
No?
can do two groups easily.
We can do two, no?
Yeah.
So 31 to 40 and 41 to 50. Since it's on the same topic.
Any other question? Nothing? Okay.
Okay, y'all can continue to
Discuss.
discuss and talk about the topic that, and wherever we are required, you can even ask us to join in, or if you don't want us to also, that's perfectly fine. But you can continue on this, the
Yeah,
same.
and just one tiny little bit thing. So
Yeah.
it is this various conflict theory which also leads to a lot of conflict in terms of understanding that who has the legitimate voice to speak for whom. Okay, because for every narration, when you, so for, if you will speak for women, they'll say, okay, you're not speaking for Muslim women, you're not speaking for Dalit women. Then they'll say you're not speaking for tribal women. It's the same thing when you talk about, say, environment. You will say, but you know how environment is experienced or engaged through a bourgeois environment. So there's literature about bourgeois environmentalism, there's literature about, you know, occupancy environmentalism. So it is because our understanding of conflict emerges from wherever we are situated. We have also developed this habit, or we also have this tendency to jump into this whole conclusion that who has the legitimate voice to speak. Okay, but you need to understand that it is so multifaceted that it is not easy to immediately make conclusions or to immediately say that who is a legitimate. It has taken, all of these struggles have taken years to even come to a point where we can say that, yeah, these are also different kind of conflicting situations. Okay, so everyone should pay attention to read, to see that where are these voices coming from, you know, what kind of politics also goes into saying that what is a legitimate voice and not legitimate voice. So it is just not between right and left anymore. Even left also has now different voices and different understanding of who comes from where. Okay, good.
All right. So if you have no questions, then we'll meet next class at that is on Friday at 1:30.
Yeah. Okay,
Okay. Bye.
bye.